The scent of sawdust and solvent was my anchor, a rough balm against the ragged edges of my mind. My hands, once accustomed to the cold weight of a service pistol, now found solace in the precise carving of reclaimed timber. Each cut, each stroke of the sandpaper, a small victory against the chaos that still clawed at the corners of my vision. I was Cole, and this quiet workshop, tucked away from the city's judging gaze, was my purgatory. Light, a pale, anemic thing, filtered through the grime-streaked window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in slow, silent eddies. My work, a half-finished wooden automaton, sat on the bench, its gears waiting to be fitted, its painted eyes staring blankly ahead. A mirror I sometimes thought of my own existence. Disgraced, detached, meticulously reassembling the fragments of a life shattered by a ghost. The shrill, insistent ring of the landline, an antique rotary dial I kept for its sheer anachronism, ripped through the stillness. I hesitated, my fingers still gripping the chisel, its edge a familiar promise. No one called me anymore, not unless it was an accident or a ghost. Cole, I answered, my voice a gravelly whisper unused to the sound. It's the captain, the voice on the other end rumbled, thick with fatigue and something else, an unspoken urgency. I know you're out, but it's different. My grip tightened on the chisel, the captain. He was one of the few who still occasionally offered a nod of respect, despite the wreckage of my career. Different how? A heist, last night, the Rothchild collection. My breath hitched. The Rothschilds, their private vault legendary for its impenetrable defenses, its priceless artifacts, not just money but history, art. This wasn't a smash-and grab, this spoke of precision, of a mind that saw theft as a performance. What was taken? I asked. A tremor in my voice I tried to suppress. The phantom limb of my past throbbed. The Eye of Osiris, the captain replied, his voice dropping to a low growl. And the serpent's embrace papyrus, but that's not the half of it, Cole, the way they did it. He paused, and I could almost hear him sifting through the chaos of his own thoughts. No forced entry, the alarms somehow bypassed, every camera loop, every sensor utterly blind. Not a single guard disturbed, not a scratch on the vault door. They didn't just disable the system, Cole, they danced around it, and the escape. This was it, the moment the past would either remain buried or claw its way back to the surface. The escape. A private airstrip, no lights, engine running, vanished without a trace. The words hung in the air, a bell tolling in the desolate landscape of my memory. No forced entry, alarms bypassed, surgical precision, no witnesses, a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. It was a refrain, a macabre poem I had heard before, etched into the very fabric of my downfall. The obsidian feather, the symbol, the calling card, it was him or a specter wearing his skin. Cole, are you still there? The captain's voice cut through my growing paralysis. I'm here, I managed, my voice rougher than before. The chisel slipped from my fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. Tell me everything, every detail, from the moment the vault was last checked to the first light of dawn. I listened, my mind a furious storm of recollection and comparison. The captain described the scene with the meticulous detail of a man still reeling from its implications. The guards found tranquilized, not harmed, just asleep. The precision of the cuts on the display cases, so clean they could have been made by a laser. The absence of dust, of fingerprints, of any stray fiber. It was too clean, too perfect. They even tidied up, the captain muttered, a note of bewildered frustration in his voice. Left the security console neat, almost polite. Polite, that was the word I remembered from the old case. The cruel, mocking politeness of a predator who saw his victims as mere props in his grand design. I closed my eyes, a parade of old crime scene photos flashing behind my eyelids. The way the victims had been posed, almost artfully. The specific, non-essential items taken, always symbolic, and the feathers, always the feathers. Cole, I know what you're thinking, the captain said, his voice softening. But it can't be, he's gone, gone. That was the official verdict, presumed dead, but I had never believed it, never truly. There was no body, no conclusive evidence, just a sudden, inexplicable cessation of his gruesome symphony. And now the music had begun again. A tremor ran through my hands, not of fear, but of a long-dormant fury reawakening. The dust motes in my workshop seemed to swirl faster, mirroring the chaos in my mind. Was this a copycat, a twisted homage? The captain was still talking, offering me the chance to stay out of it, to remain in my self-imposed exile. But the words were distant, muffled by the roar of recognition in my ears. The Eye of Osiris, the serpent's embrace. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running. It was a cruel, undeniable. I had failed once. I had allowed him to slip through my fingers, leaving a trail of blood and shattered lives, including my own. But this time felt different. This wasn't just a ghost. and for the first time in years, the blank stare of my unfinished automaton didn't feel like a mirror. It felt like a warning. "Send me everything," I said, my voice firm, resolute. "Every detail, every scrap of information, I'm coming in." The quiet hum of the workshop, once my refuge, now felt like a cage. The hunt, it seemed, had found me again, and I was determined not to let it escape this time. The city, a restless beast, exhaled its metallic sigh into the pre-dawn hush. I sat in my quiet space, the newspaper spread before me like a shroud. The headlines screamed of a new shadow stretching across the metropolis, a series of audacious thefts, each executed with a chilling precision. Too precise, too familiar. The tremor in my hands, which had been a long-dormant tremor, now vibrated with a terrible clarity. Gone, they had said of the architect of my past torment, presumed dead. But the music, that grotesque symphony of methodical cruelty, had indeed begun again. My reflection in the darkened window showed a face etched with lines that weren't there a decade ago, eyes that had seen too much shadow. They called it disgrace, my departure from the force. I called it a reckoning, a consequence of a failure that still gnawed at the marrow of my bones. I had let him slip. I had let the serial orchestrator vanish into the ether, leaving behind only echoes and unanswered cries. I couldn't stand by, not this time. The burner phone, a relic I kept buried deep, vibrated against the worn wood of my desk. A single cryptic message, dawn, the usual. My stomach tightened into a knot of reluctant anticipation. The usual was never a good sign. The drive was a blur of streetlights and silent commitment. Each mile that peeled away from the familiar comfort of my solitude felt like a deeper plunge into the murky depths I had sworn to escape. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a testament to the internal argument raging within me. Ghosts, Cole. I turned off the main road, the tires crunching on loose gravel. Ahead, a vast expanse of asphalt, a desolate strip of forgotten ambition, materialized from the gloom. This was it, a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The low thrum of a turboprop engine, a persistent mechanical heartbeat, vibrated through the ground, a predatory whisper in the oppressive quiet. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of jet fuel and damp earth. A single figure leaned against the fuselage of a small, twin-engine craft, a silhouette against the barely perceptible glow of the eastern horizon. "Ire punctual, Cole," a voice, gravelly and familiar, cut through the engine's whine. It belonged to an old contact, a broker of information and favors who thrived in the periphery of legality. I approached, my hand instinctively finding the reassuring weight of the worn pistol tucked into my waistband, a habit I hadn't shaken despite my civilian status. "I said it was urgent," I replied, my voice raspy. The contact pushed a thick manila envelope into my hands. His eyes, glinting in the faint light, held a mixture of caution and curiosity. "They're calling it the Ghost Syndicate. 3 hits in a month. No witnesses, no forensic trace, clean as a surgeon's blade." I pulled out the contents, a stack of grainy surveillance stills, a few hastily scribbled reports, and a single high-resolution photograph. My breath caught in my throat. The photograph depicted a small, ornate wooden bird, no larger than my thumb, resting on a velvet cloth. Its wings were intricately carved, its eyes tiny polished beads. But it wasn't just any bird, it was a mockingbird, and its right wing was broken, snapped cleanly at the joint. "Found at the scene of the last heist," the contact murmured, watching my face. "Left in plain sight, almost like a calling card." My mind reeled, always a bird, always a perfect, flawlessly carved wooden sparrow left at the epicenter of his chaos. A sparrow, symbolizing freedom and the soul's journey. This mockingbird, and broken. A mockingbird, I repeated, the word tasting like ash, and broken. Means something to I? The contact pressed, his gaze sharpening. I ignored the question. The sparrow was his symbol, his twisted signature of a life taken, a soul freed. This mockingbird, fractured and imperfect, was a perversion of that signature. It was almost him, too close to be coincidence, too different to be an exact match. Wait, that doesn't add up. The old killer was meticulous, obsessed with perfection. This broken wing felt like a deliberate act of defiance, or perhaps a message. A mockingbird known for mimicking other birds' songs. There was this a copycat mocking the original. No fingerprints, no discernible origin. The carving itself is almost identical to the old one's, same distinct style. But the bird, it's a mockingbird, and it's broken. He paused, his gaze assessing. "They say the old one was never found, Cole, still out there somewhere, a ghost." My gut twisted. The memory of the last victim's face, pale and lifeless, flashed before my eyes. The empty eyes of the family I had to tell there was no justice, no closure. It wasn't just a ghost I was chasing, it was redemption. My failure had been a raw, gaping wound for years. Now it was bleeding anew. Who else knows about the bird? I demanded, clenching the photograph in my hand. Just a few, the lead investigator, a captain from major crimes, and now you. He stepped away from the plane, moving towards the cockpit. Be careful, Cole. This isn't your jurisdiction anymore, and whatever this is, it feels personal. The engine roared to life, a louder, more insistent growl. The propellers began their lazy rotation, gathering speed, blurring into shimmering discs. The contact climbed into the cockpit, a final, fleeting glance over his shoulder. Consider this a courtesy. After all, you taught me everything I know about cleaning up messes. The plane taxied slowly, then turned, its single landing light cutting a stark beam through the pre-dawn murk. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments, the old patterns, the new deviations. This wasn't just a series of heists. This was a direct challenge, and it was directed at me. My unofficial investigation had begun. The first clue, a twisted echo of a past horror, lay heavy in my hand. Exposed skin leaving a raw chill in its wake. The faint hum of my truck's idling engine, a solitary mechanical heartbeat, offered the only counterpoint to the receding roar of the departing aircraft. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, felt like the edge of the world, a forgotten canvas painted in shades of charcoal and regret. The cold seeped into my bones, a familiar companion from nights spent chasing ghosts in the concrete labyrinth. The air, crisp with the scent of pine and distant rain, offered no solace, just the bitter tang of a promise made in desperation. He spoke of patterns, of echoes. I had seen them too, faint at first, like distant ripples in stagnant water. Now the ripples were growing. Finally, I moved, each step a deliberate refusal to crumble under the weight of memory. The truck's cabin, though Spartan, offered a momentary reprieve from the biting wind. I gripped the steering wheel, the worn leather cool beneath my fingers, and pulled away from the deserted strip, the twin beams of my headlights carving a path through the encroaching gloom. The morning unfolded in a haze of lukewarm coffee and the insistent drone of the news. I hadn't sought it out, but the reports found me, seeping into the quiet corners of my apartment like an unwelcome fog. But this third one, the voices on the radio breathless with disbelief, was a thunderclap. A daring overnight breach of the Sterling Federal Reserve's regional vault. The anchor's voice, usually so composed, fractured with a tremor of shock. Sources confirm the theft of a substantial cache of uncirculated currency, estimated in the tens of millions. Authorities are baffled by the lack of forced entry and the sophistication of the operation, which reportedly bypassed multiple layers of advanced security. My hand holding the chipped mug stilled. Sterling Federal Reserve, not just ambitious but audacious. This wasn't a petty thief or a desperate crew. I drove not to the scene I knew they wouldn't let me within a mile, but to a vantage point I remembered from my old days, a rooftop overlooking the financial district. Even from a distance, the Sterling building was a hive of activity. Emergency vehicles, their lights a frantic disco in the gray dawn, choked the streets. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, formed a perimeter. The usual chaotic energy of a major crime scene was there, but beneath it I sensed a new kind of tension, a palpable unease. This wasn't just a robbery, it was an insult to the city's very foundations. My eyes, trained by years of dissecting crime scenes, scanned the building's exterior. No shattered windows, no breached walls. The news report had been accurate. Bypassed multiple layers of advanced security. That was the killer's hallmark, not brute force but an intricate dance of circumvention, a meticulous dismantling of defenses from the inside out. He didn't break locks, he understood how they worked, then made them irrelevant. This wasn't just a copycat. The first two had been rehearsals. This was the overture. The scale, the target, the method, it all screamed the same name, the name that had haunted my every waking moment for years. But there was something else, a detail that snagged at the edges of my perception, the sheer audacity of the target. The killer I knew was precise, yes, but also discreet. This felt louder, almost like a deliberate provocation. As the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in pale, indifferent hues, my phone buzzed. The caller ID was a number I hadn't seen in years, a number that belonged to a past I had desperately tried to bury. My jaw tightened. They were fast, faster than I expected, even with a heist of this magnitude. Cole, a voice, gravelly and tired, rasped through the speaker. It was the detective, a man whose face had grown etched with the same weariness that marked my own. Been a long time, you heard the news, I imagine. It's hard not to, I replied, my voice a flat line. I could hear the sirens wailing faintly in the background on his end. He was at the scene. We found something, he continued, his tone devoid of pleasantries. A small detail, not for public consumption. A specific kind of residue on one of the vault's internal mechanisms. Exactly like the residue found at the Blackwood murders all those years ago. A frantic drumbeat began beneath my ribs. Residue. That was the calling card the killer had left, a microscopic fingerprint of his unique process. My fingers tightened on the phone, the plastic creaking. "And you're calling me because?" "Because," the detective's voice hardened. "You're the only one who connected those cases. The only one who saw the pattern. And because you've been spotted at the electronics warehouse, at the art dealers. And now my sources tell me you've been asking questions about these incidents even before they hit the headlines." A glacial current in my veins. My past wasn't just catching up. It was actively reaching out, pulling me back into its suffocating embrace. I knew this was coming, but the speed, the directness, still struck me. They weren't just asking for help, they were accusing. "I have my own reasons," I answered, choosing my words carefully. "Your reasons don't matter, Cole. What matters is that you're circling these crimes like a vulture, and the modus operandi screams the one case you couldn't close. You're either involved or you're a goddamn magnet for this kind of trouble. Either way, you're now part of my investigation. Consider this your official, unofficial warning. Stay clear, or I'll have you in a holding cell so fast your head will spin." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, the metallic taste of fear and adrenaline on my tongue. The city hummed below me, oblivious to the personal storm that had just broken. The detective's words echoed, a stark pronouncement. They had linked the new heists to the old killer, and by extension, they had linked me. This wasn't just about catching a ghost anymore. Now I was the one being watched. The stakes had risen, not just for the city, but for my own precarious freedom. This was far beyond what I had anticipated. The hum of the city, once a lullaby of indifference, now grated, a cruel counterpoint to the discordant symphony in my skull. The detective's clipped words, severed mid-sentence, still echoed. A link, a past killer, and extends. I stood by the window, the glass cool against my forehead, watching the distant lights shiver like trapped fireflies. They had brought his back. Or rather, he had never truly left, merely retreated into the shadows of my guilt, waiting for the opportune moment to resurface. Sleep was a forgotten luxury, a concept belonging to a different life. I moved through the quiet rooms of my apartment, each step a deliberate act against the inertia of dread. The old case files, thick with dust and the scent of stale paper, lay scattered across my worn desk. The new heists, 3 of them, meticulously executed. A secure vault at the city's heart, a private collection from an estate on the outskirts, and a shipment intercepted on the docks. At first glance, the targets seemed disparate, chosen for their sheer value. Rubies, antique firearms, rare manuscripts. Simple greed, the official reports had concluded. But the detective's call had shattered that comfortable narrative. He was involved. And if he was involved, greed was merely a veil. I pulled up the digital summaries of the recent incidents, cross-referencing them with my meticulously kept notes from the old investigation. The old killer, a ghost I had chased into oblivion, had never been about material gain. His currency was psychological. He stole pieces of lives, not jewels. My fingers traced the lines of an old blueprint, a map of the city as it was a decade ago. The first victim, a quiet archivist, had been found in a forgotten warehouse. The second, a renowned sculptor in his studio. The third, a reclusive botanist in her greenhouse. No overt connections, no obvious pattern to their professions or social standing. But there had been something else, something subtle and undercurrent I had failed to grasp. I started listing the stolen items from the new heists, not by their monetary worth, but by their essence. The rubies, deep red like ancient blood, often associated with power and passion. The antique firearms, relics of conflict, instruments of control. The rare manuscripts, vessels of knowledge, repositories of forgotten histories. Then I considered the locations of the new heists. The vault was beneath a building that once housed the city's oldest printing press, responsible for early civic documents. The estate had belonged to a family instrumental in founding a specific historical society. The dock shipment was destined for a museum dedicated to colonial artifacts. It wasn't about the objects themselves or even the places as they were now. It was about what they represented. Power, history, knowledge, control, and something else, a subtle thread that connected them all to the city's very foundations. I remembered a small detail from the old case, a dismissed anomaly. The archivist had been found clutching a fragment of a very old city charter. The sculptor's last completed work had been a relief depicting the city's first mayor. The botanist had been cultivating a species of flower said to have been brought over by the first settlers. The breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just about the objects or the locations now. It was about the symbols. He wasn't stealing wealth. He was stealing the city's identity, its memory, its very narrative. Each act was a deliberate erasure, a rewriting. This was far more sinister than I had ever imagined, and it explained the meticulous planning, the utter precision. It wasn't a random spree, it was a ritual. My phone, lying inert beside the scattered papers, vibrated, a text message from an unknown number. A single coordinate followed by a time. No name, no message, just the stark numbers. My gaze fell upon an old map pinned to the corkboard above my desk. I found the coordinate. It was far out, beyond the city limits, nestled in a desolate stretch of land. A private airstrip, no lights, engine running. Why there? There was this that extends. The detective had been about to utter. A meeting, a drop, or a trap. This was the link, the tenuous thread pulling me back into the labyrinth. I grabbed my worn leather jacket, the one that smelled of old cases and stale coffee. The determination, long dormant, flared to life, a desperate beacon in the encroaching gloom. I had to know what was happening at that remote strip of tarmac. The drive was long, the urban sprawl slowly giving way to skeletal trees and open fields. The night sky, devoid of city light pollution, stretched above, a canvas of indifferent stars. As I neared the coordinates, the road narrowed, becoming a pockmarked track. Then, through a gap in a stand of pines, I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the distance. It was the sound of a small plane, its engines idling, a promise of imminent departure. I could make out the silhouette of a small jet, its form squat and predatory against the horizon. No landing lights, no ground crew, just the plane and the rhythmic pulse of its engine. My breath hitched. It was a large, oddly shaped crate, carefully, almost reverently, being loaded into the aircraft's belly. The figure was tall, lean, moving with an unsettling grace. A flicker of light, brief as a firefly's pulse, came from within the plane's open hatch, illuminating for a split second the side of the figure's face. It was impossible to make out features, but the angle, the particular set of the shoulders, sent a jolt of recognition through me. A memory, raw and unbidden, of a night a decade ago, the way he had stood, framed by the flickering streetlights of a crime scene. No, it can't be, I thought, my mind recoiling from the implication. It all coalesced into an unbearable weight of possibility. The crate disappeared into the plane. The hatch began to close, and then just before it sealed, I saw it. A glint. A small, familiar emblem affixed to the side of the crate, catching the ambient starlight. It was the stylized crest of the city's historical society, the very one whose family estate had been targeted in the second heist. A piece of the city's stolen past about to take flight. The plane's engines roared, a sudden deafening crescendo shattering the night. It wasn't just a pattern, it was an escape, and I was too late. The plane, a dark, hungry bird, clawed at the night. Its engines, a guttural roar, swallowed the last sliver of silence at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running. My breath hitched, a ragged sound lost in the diesel fumes and the wind whipped up by the propellers. The hatch had begun its slow, mechanical descent, a metal eyelid closing on a secret. But in that final, vanishing gap, I had seen it. A glint, a small, familiar emblem affixed to the side of the crate. A coiled serpent, its head crowned with 3 small, jagged points. The symbol of the Viper. This wasn't just a heist. It was a taunt, a twisted signature scrawled across the canvas of my failure. The plane ascended, a phantom dissolving into the ink of the sky, leaving me alone with the dwindling echo of its power and the acrid taste of diesel on my tongue. The emblem. It wasn't a common symbol, not one found in any guild book or heraldry. It was personal, an esoteric design that had surfaced only once years ago on a piece of parchment found clutched in the hand of a victim. A detail never released to the public, known only to a tight inner circle of investigators, and I now realized with a sickening lurch, to a handful of informants who had been privy to the deepest, most guarded aspects of the case. One name surfaced, sharp and unwelcome, the contact. A man I'd cultivated, paid, and ultimately dismissed as unreliable when his information dried up right after the Viper vanished. He'd always had an uncanny knack for uncovering the obscure, for finding the threads that led to the city's hidden weavers. My old truck, a rusted relic of better days, grown to life. The engine sputtered, then caught, mirroring the desperate spark of hope or perhaps delusion that flickered within me. I didn't know where the plane was headed, but the emblem was a tether. The drive was a blur of city lights giving way to industrial decay. The abandoned factory district, a sprawling graveyard of forgotten ambition, loomed under a bruised sky. I found the factory, a skeletal structure of rusted girders and shattered windows, its silhouette jagged against the faint glow of the distant metropolis. No lights, no sounds but the wind whistling through broken panes, a fitting stage for a reckoning. The air inside the factory was thick with dust, the metallic tang of decay, and the faint, unmistakable scent of stale cigarette smoke. My footsteps echoed, each crunch of debris underfoot a potential betrayal. The vast space swallowed sound, turning my own breathing into a thunderous drum. Then a flicker. A single bare bulb suspended from the ceiling in a far corner, casting a sickly yellow glow on a makeshift table piled with discarded electronics. And there he was, the contact, hunched over a circuit board, a magnifying glass pressed to his eye. He didn't startle, didn't flinch. Only slowly, deliberately did he lower the magnifying glass and turn, his eyes, still sharp and reptilian, locking onto mine. "Cole, the old stories, they cling to you, don't they? Like grave dirt." He leaned back, his chair creaking ominously. "What makes you think I know anything about fairy tales, Cole? My trade is circuits, not legends." "Don't play coy," I pressed, stepping closer, the dust motes dancing in the meager light. "I saw the emblem on a crate at the airstrip. They bite." "Did it bite you?" I asked, my voice low, laced with a threat I hadn't felt in years. "Are you working for him or just selling pieces of the past to the highest bidder?" He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Working for, selling, Cole, you always saw the world in such simple terms, black and white, good and evil, some of us just exist in the gray, we adapt, we survive." He paused, his gaze unblinking. "Besides, you wouldn't understand the Viper. He has a way of making people see things his way, a way of persuading." "Persuading whom?" I demanded. "The victims, the ones with the scars." His eyes flickered then, a momentary widening that I almost missed. "Scars? What scars? The newspapers never mentioned." "Ah, yes, the other scar. The one on the left shoulder blade, shaped like a ragged star. The one only a few of us knew about, yes." He smirked again, a slow, knowing curl of his lips. "A detail for connoisseurs, wouldn't you say?" My breath caught. The left shoulder blade, the ragged star, that was it. That was the detail. A specific, almost ritualistic mutilation kept entirely from the public, even from most of the force. A secret held by the lead investigators, the medical examiner, and the killer himself, and apparently by the contact, not to anyone outside the investigation. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but the gleam in his eyes betrayed him. "A good contact has his sources, Cole. I taught me that much." "No," I growled, taking another step. "That wasn't a source, that was inside. I knew because I was there, or I was told by someone who was there, someone intimate with the details, someone like the Viper." His smirk vanished. The air crackled with a sudden, palpable tension. "I read getting ahead of myself, Cole. I had been so focused on the contact, so consumed by the revelation, that I hadn't sensed the presence until it was too late. A heavy, blunt force slammed into my ribs, driving the air from my lungs. My training kicked in, muscle memory taking over, but I was older, slower, and my body carried the weight of years of neglect. A fist connected with my jaw, sending a shockwave through my skull. My head snapped back, stars exploding behind my eyes. I fought back, landing a desperate punch to the hooded figure's midsection, eliciting a grunt. But he was relentless, stronger, and clearly prepared. I tasted blood, metallic and bitter. "He's getting sloppy, isn't he?" The contact's voice drifted across the factory floor, calm and detached, almost clinical. Too many ghosts in his head. I ducked a wild swing, trying to regain my footing. Another blow, this time to the back of my head, sent me sprawling. My vision swam, the single bare bulb above flickering erratically, mimicking the chaos in my mind. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. "Leave him," the contact commanded, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. "He served his purpose. He knows too much, but not enough to matter." I saw the glint of something in his hand, a length of pipe, I think. My head throbbed, my ribs screamed, and the cut on my side burned. A significant setback indeed. They had outmaneuvered me, used my hunger for answers against me. The Viper was back, and he had an old friend in his corner. And now so did I. A new kind of wound, a deeper betrayal. The rough ground bit into my cheek, a cold, gritty kiss. Each breath was a fresh splinter of pain in my side, a cruel reminder of the hooded figure's contemptuous farewell. My vision swam, a kaleidoscope of dark shapes and the persistent, throbbing ache behind my eyes. Above the ringing in my ears, a deeper rumble vibrated through the earth, growing in intensity. I forced my head to lift, a monumental effort that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. The small aircraft, a twin-engine something, I couldn't tell what through the haze, was already taxiing. Its silhouette, a predatory bird, cut against the barely lighter expanse where the horizon should have been. I saw them, two figures bored with a practiced ease that spoke of prior arrangement, of countless rehearsals. But the contact. For a fleeting instant, as the contact climbed the short ladder into the plane, a stray flicker from the dashboard lights within the cockpit caught their profile. It was less than a second, a ghost of an image, but it was enough. Not a clear, undeniable recognition, but a jolt, a profound unsettling in the marrow of my bones. A shape, a tilt of the head, a certain angularity to the jaw that felt familiar, dangerous. The plane's engines roared, a crescendo that stole the very air from my lungs. The prop wash whipped grit and dust into my face as it turned, gathering speed. My mind, still sluggish from the blow, screamed at me to move to stop them, but my body was a leaden weight, pinned by agony and inertia. It lifted, a defiant roar diminishing to a distant hum, then to nothing, swallowed by the vast, indifferent night. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the ragged rhythm of my own breathing and the frantic pulse at my temples. I lay there, tasting dust and despair, the metallic tang of something else, perhaps blood, in my mouth. The rib throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against my consciousness. But the image, that fleeting glimpse of the contact's face, refused to fade. It was like a splinter in my mind, too small to grasp fully, but sharp enough to cause persistent irritation. Where have I seen that face before? Not in person, not recently. It was too young, too distinct, yet it carried an echo of something ancient, something buried deep in the archives of my memory. I pushed myself up, gritting my teeth against the fire in my side. Each movement was a protest, but the need to understand was a fiercer torment. I stumbled towards where the plane had been, scanning the ground, hoping for some dropped clue, a discarded piece of paper, anything. There was nothing, only disturbed earth and the lingering scent of aviation fuel. Their escape had been flawless, as meticulously planned as the heists themselves. That word, meticulously. It clawed at my mind, the heists, the precision, the almost theatrical flair of their execution, leaving just enough breadcrumbs to taunt but never enough to truly track. It was the same signature, not just the methods but the attitude, the arrogance. I leaned against a rusted fuel drum, trying to anchor myself as the pieces began to shift, to grind together in my mind. The heists weren't about the money, I realized with a sickening lurch. Not truly, they were about the statement. The original killer, the one I'd failed to catch all those years ago, had never been about simple greed. These heists, though, were targeting objects, seemingly disparate objects, a rare manuscript from a private collector, a unique, handcrafted pocket watch from an auction house, a specific painting from a gallery that held little monetary value but immense symbolic weight. Wait, that doesn't add up. If this was the original killer, why the shift from flesh and blood to art and artifacts, unless these objects were not merely targets, but tools, components of something larger, a message. And then the splinter in my mind broke through, sharp and clear, the contact's face. It wasn't a random face. It was a younger version of a face I'd stared at in countless photographs, in faded newspaper clippings, in the haunted eyes of a grieving family. A face from the periphery of the old case, a face etched with the same kind of loss that had driven me to ruin. The younger sibling, the sister of the very first victim in my old, failed case. She'd been a child then, a quiet, watchful girl with eyes too old for her years. I remembered interviewing her, her small voice, her unwavering gaze that seemed to see right through me, right through my inadequate questions. He had vanished from public view shortly after the initial investigation collapsed, swallowed by the grief and the shame of a system that had failed her. I'd always assumed she'd simply retreated, sought anonymity, but she hadn't retreated. He had been watching, waiting, learning. The implications hit me like another physical blow, far more devastating than the kick to my ribs. This wasn't a copycat. This was something far more insidious. This was a direct continuation, a ghost from the past given flesh and motive. And the motive, it wasn't just about the original killer's methods. It was about me. She blamed me, the objects. They weren't random. The rare manuscript, it was a first edition of a philosophical text her sister had adored, a specific passage underlined in her diary. The pocket watch, it had belonged to their grandfather, stolen from their home after the murder, a detail never publicly released, only known to a select few, including myself and the immediate family. The painting, it was a landscape her sister had painted, a small, amateur piece, but one that held immense sentimental value. Each item was a piece of her sister, a piece of the past I had failed to protect. And he was collecting them not for their value, but as a macabre trophy case, a monument to my failure. He was not merely mirroring the methods, he was completing the original killer's work, but with a new, terrifying layer of personal vengeance directed squarely at me. My breath hitched. Could I have been so blind? The original killer had been a ghost, an enigma. But this was flesh and blood, a living embodiment of my greatest failure, using the very methods I had studied to taunt me, to punish me. The true nature of the threat unfurled before me, a terrifying tapestry woven from threads of grief, vengeance, and my own haunting past. The person I had just seen disappearing into the night wasn't just a perpetrator. He was the perpetrator, and her connection to me was a blade twisting in an already open wound. He was not merely a threat to the city, but a direct challenge to what little remained of my soul. I had to stop her, not just for the sake of those who might become her next victims, but to finally confront the demon I had unwittingly created. The phantom image still clung to my retinas, a ghost in the afterglow of a memory that hadn't fully formed. It was a profile, a sharp line against the faint glow of instruments, seen for less than a breath before the pilot's door swung shut. A jolt, yes, a profound unsettling, but the name, the face, refused to coalesce. I stood alone on the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, the drone of the departing plane a dwindling hum in the vast, empty night. The chill wind bit at my exposed skin, mirroring the cold dread that had begun to settle deep in my gut. My mind replayed the fleeting vision, searching for purchase, for any detail that would anchor it, but it slipped away like smoke. Was it a trick of the light? A desperate fabrication of a mind starved for answers. I clenched my fists, the gravel biting into my palms. No, the visceral certainty that had shot through me was real, someone familiar, someone I knew or had known. The implication was a poisoned arrow finding its mark. This wasn't just a puzzle anymore, it was a carefully orchestrated performance, and I was being watched. The engine note of the small plane finally vanished, leaving an oppressive silence that screamed of abandonment. I had to move. The air here felt thin, tainted. My next lead, fragile as spun glass, lay with the informant. We had arranged a meeting for dawn, a rendezvous point in the labyrinthine warrens of the old docklands. The informant's bolt hole was a forgotten corner of an abandoned factory, nestled between rusted machinery and broken windows, a place where light dared not tread. I parked my battered sedan a block away, the engine's dying cough echoing too loudly in the pre-dawn quiet. The informant's usual signal a faint, almost imperceptible whistle was absent. Only the sighing wind answered my silent calls. A knot tightened in my stomach. This was wrong, terribly wrong. I reached the makeshift alcove the informant called home. It was a crude shelter fashioned from salvaged corrugated iron and stacked pallets meant to be invisible to casual eyes. But it wasn't invisible now. The corrugated iron was peeled back, not torn by brute force, but carefully unfastened, as if by someone who knew its secret. My breath hitched, a jagged shard in my chest. I pushed aside the flimsy barrier, my senses screaming. The space inside was a wreck. A overturned crate, a spilled bag of dried provisions, a tattered blanket thrown askew. There was no sign of the informant. My eyes swept the small enclosure, frantic, searching for anything, any clue. Then I saw it. Tucked neatly beneath a splintered wooden beam, almost hidden, was a small, hand-carved wooden bird. Its wings were outstretched, poised in an eternal flight, its tiny eyes carved with a disturbing lifelike quality. This wasn't just a carved bird. This was the carved bird, the one from the old case. The one the killer, the one I failed to catch, always left behind. But this one was different. Etched into its smooth wooden breast with painstaking precision was a single stylized letter, C. My name. The air in the factory grew heavy, suffocating. My mind reeled, grappling with the impossible. This wasn't a copycat, not entirely. This was a message, a declaration. The killer knew me, knew my past, knew the intimate, agonizing details of the case that had shattered my career and haunted my waking nightmares. The informant hadn't just been a target, he had been bait for me. A tremor ran through my hand, making the piece waver. How could this be? The original killer had vanished without a trace, a ghost in the wind. It implied intimacy, a complicity. My own doubt, a constant companion, began to gnaw. Was I seeing what I wanted to see? There was the ghost of my past failure so potent that I was twisting every new horror to fit its mold. But the bird, the sea, it was undeniable. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a challenge. The stakes had just been raised, higher than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about stopping a new wave of crime. It was about confronting a specter from my past, a specter that was now reaching out directly for me. A face from the very case that had broken me. The game had begun, and I was the chosen pawn. The phantom, a whisper of a silhouette against the dying instrument glow, gnawed at me. It wasn't a face, not fully, but a familiar angle of jaw, a certain set to the shoulders that had been etched into the landscape of my worst memories. The jolt had been profound, a tremor through the very bedrock of my resolve, but the name still hovered just beyond the reach of recall, a word on the tip of a forgotten tongue. I pressed a hand to my temple, the throbbing there a dull counterpoint to the relentless hum of my thoughts. This wasn't just mirroring now. This was a direct echo, a deliberate taunt from the architect of my downfall. The air in my small, cluttered space felt thick with the ghosts of files and the scent of stale coffee. maps unfurled across the table, crisscrossed with lines of speculation, pins marking the sites of the recent violations. Each heist, a meticulous ballet of precision and psychological warfare. Each one a note played from a score I knew too well, a melody of methodical cruelty. But there was a dissonance, a subtle alteration in the tempo that had begun to grate. The signature was there, yes, undeniable, but the flourish, the final, almost theatrical touch, felt new, sharper, more personal. It wasn't enough to chase the shadow. I had to invite it into the light. They didn't just execute, they announced. And what better announcement than to reclaim a past triumph, to reenact the very moment of their perceived victory over me? They would return to the scene of their original masterpiece, or a place that symbolized it. Not for money, but for the exquisite satisfaction of completion, of proving their dominance. My gaze drifted to the crumpled blueprint tucked beneath a stack of old reports. It was an anomaly, a detail from the original case that had always bothered me, a loose thread I'd never quite been able to weave back into the fabric. A small, private facility, long abandoned, just off the grid. It was where the other operation, the one that had been overshadowed by the larger, more public spectacle of the killer's first grand theft, had taken place. A place of quiet accumulation, not overt display. The killer had always been about the grand gesture, but the recent heists, while flashy, also hinted at a deeper, more practical acquisition. A subtle shift. This was the crack in the facade, the point where the new architect, or perhaps the old one with a new obsession, would feel compelled to revisit. I needed to construct a lure, a temptation so potent it would override even their meticulous caution. And what could be more tempting than the very thing they had meticulously gathered but never fully claimed? Information. Not just any information, but the data that confirmed their genius, the evidence of their untraceable craft. I pulled out old schematics, cross-referenced forgotten logs, piecing together a digital ghost, a breadcrumb trail that led directly to a phantom cache of unrecovered intelligence from the old case. It was a bluff, a fabrication, but one designed to appeal to the particular vanity I now understood. The killer thrived on the knowledge of their own unseen brilliance. To hint that there was a hidden ledger, a secret testament to their perfect execution, would be irresistible. My fingers flew across the keyboard, constructing the digital lure, embedding it within a network of old, defunct servers I knew the perpetrator had accessed before. A bait fish in a digital ocean. It was a place of transit, of fleeting presence. I found myself later that night at a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The drone of the propeller was a low, guttural growl vibrating through the soles of my boots. I wasn't the pilot, merely the passenger, securing a final piece of the puzzle. The proprietor, a silent figure whose face was obscured by the night and the brim of a cap, nodded once, accepting the payment. My package, a small, nondescript container, was loaded into the cargo hold. It contained a carefully crafted, inert replica of the unrecovered intelligence, designed to be visually convincing but ultimately empty, a testament to my own calculated gamble. My mind raced, reviewing every variable. Was I truly seeing the pattern, or merely imposing my own desperate narrative onto the chaos? The thought, a serpent coiling in my gut, made me pause. What if I was wrong? What if this was not a trap for them, but a meticulously laid snare for me, designed by someone who knew my every obsession, my every failing? The memory of the profile, the sharp line, flashed again. It felt like looking into a distorted mirror, a reflection I almost recognized but couldn't quite grasp. The perpetrator, I mused, had always been a master of misdirection, a weaver of illusions. Was this new layer of deception simply another shroud? Or was it, as I now hoped, the very thread I could unravel to expose them? I closed my eyes, picturing the target location, the abandoned facility, and the adjacent, seldom-used warehouse I had chosen for my stakeout. The digital lure was set, broadcasting its silent invitation. The physical bait was on its way, a tangible ghost from the past. All that remained was to wait. The trap was sprung. Now the waiting began, a torment of anticipation, each second stretched thin, ready to snap. The jolt had been profound, a tremor through the very bedrock, and then a surge. Years of dust and regret scraped away by the raw edge of recognition. This wasn't a ghost of the past. It was the past, breathing and moving right in front of me. My legs, stiff from too many hours hunched over cold coffee and colder leads, found a sudden, desperate energy. The distant hum, a low thrum against the city's muted roar, pulled me forward. It was the sound of a great beast stirring, a metallic heartbeat. The silhouette moved with a fluid grace that spoke of purpose, of an unburdened stride I hadn't possessed in ages. The city's concrete veins gave way to the broken asphalt of a forgotten industrial district. Ahead, the low, unbroken line of a structure, a hangar perhaps, loomed against the bruised sky. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the sudden quiet. The hum was louder now, a growing crescendo vibrating through the soles of my worn boots. My eyes strained against the gloom, searching for any sign, any movement. Then I saw it. A vast, desolate expanse of cracked tarmac stretched out before me, swallowed by the encroaching night. And there, stark against the horizon, was the hulking shape of a private jet. Its powerful engines were already spooling, a deep guttural roar that vibrated through the very ground. This was it. The end game. I was at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running. They turned as if sensing my presence even in the deep gloom. A beat passed, stretched thin and taut as a wire. Cole. A voice cut through the engine's growl, calm and unhurried. It was a voice I knew, a voice that had offered me counsel, fragments of truth, and misplaced empathy in the labyrinthine days of the original hunt. "You," I rasped, the single word thick with years of unanswered questions, of gnawing doubt. The angle of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, yes. But the face that now turned fully towards me, illuminated briefly by the flickering navigation lights of the jet, was one I had dismissed 1,000 times. It was the informant, the one who had always seemed to know just enough to point me in just the right direction, but never quite to the truth. The one who had watched me unravel, offering a sympathetic ear, a knowing nod. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. All this time, all the false leads, the dead ends, the ghost chases, you were feeding me crumbs, weren't you? You were so predictable, Cole, so eager to believe in a grand, unseen design. It was remarkably easy to give you just enough rope to hang yourself and then watch you swing. The word struck me harder than any physical blow. Self-doubt coiled in my gut, a venomous serpent. Had I been so blind, so desperate for closure that I'd allowed myself to be manipulated by the very architect of my downfall? The casual way they'd spoken of the Phantom's methods, the subtle admiration in their tone. I'd taken it for keen insight. It was pride. The heists, I pushed, my voice strained against the rising roar of the jet. The methods, they were always yours, weren't they? You never stopped. You just let me believe I'd failed to catch a phantom who was never truly there while you built a legend around yourself. A legend, Cole, that you helped forge, the informant countered, stepping down the last few stairs, moving with an unnerving grace. A testament to my artistry and to your spectacular incompetence. Rage, pure and unadulterated, washed over me, burning away the doubt. This wasn't just about the heists or the past. This was about every life lost, every shattered family, every night I had spent staring at the ceiling, haunted by a phantom I now realized was a meticulously crafted illusion. The informant chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound swallowed by the jet engines. Foolish Cole, always the brute force, never the finesse. They moved first, a blur of motion, surprisingly swift for their build. A glint of metal in their hand, a blade long and wickedly sharp. My breath caught, but years of instinct buried deep resurfaced. I sidestepped, the wrench a clumsy shield, deflecting the initial thrust. The blade scraped against the metal with a shriek that was lost in the engine's thunder. The event began, a desperate dance on the precipice of escape. We moved in the shadow of the colossal aircraft, the heat from its exhaust washing over us in waves. The ground vibrated, a constant reminder of the ticking clock, the imminent departure. The informant was precise, their movements economical, each lunge aimed at a vital point. I was slower, heavier, but fueled by a desperate fury that lent me an unexpected strength. I swung the wrench in wide, arcing blows, forcing them back, creating space. The air around us was thick with the smell of burning jet fuel and the metallic tang of fear. I heard my own ragged breaths, saw the glint of malice in the informant's eyes. They were enjoying this, reveling in the final act of their masterpiece. A low sweep of their leg caught mine, sending me stumbling. I hit the tarmac hard, the impact jarring my teeth. I twisted, throwing my weight, and the blade bit into my shoulder, a searing pain that stole my breath. I roared a primal sound, and brought the wrench up in a desperate, wild swing. It connected with their arm, a sickening crunch that echoed even over the engine's roar. The informant cried out, a sound of surprise and pain, stumbling back, clutching their injured arm. This was my chance. "No more running," I gasped, advancing on them, the wrench held high. They glanced at the jet, then back at me, a desperate calculation in their gaze. The engine's roar reached a deafening pitch, ready to consume us both. The jet's engine screamed, a ravenous beast demanding flight. My eyes were locked on the informant, their face a canvas of frantic calculations under the harsh, solitary glare of the landing light, the only beacon on the private airstrip, no lights, engine running. A tremor ran through them, not of fear, but of a cage rattling. I saw the shift, the precise moment the desperate flicker solidified into a decision. Their gaze snapped from me to the jet's open hatch, a chasm of metallic promise. Then, without a word, they lunged. Not at me but past me, a blur of intent towards the roaring escape. My body reacted before my mind could fully process, a phantom limb of my old life reaching out. I caught their arm, the fabric of their jacket rough beneath my fingers, and yanked back with a force I hadn't known I still possessed. They stumbled, twisting, and for a fleeting second their eyes met mine again. This time, there was no calculation, only a raw, burning hatred. It was the same cold fire I'd seen reflected in the eyes of the city's predator years ago, the one I'd failed to cage. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs. This wasn't just an informant. This was the orchestrator, the meticulous architect of the mirroring horrors. You, I rasped, the single word heavy with the weight of years. It was you all along. A chilling smile, thin and sharp as a scalpel's edge, spread across their face. Did you really think I'd simply inform? They hissed, their voice barely audible above the engine's din, yet cutting through me with unnerving clarity. I merely guided your hand, Cole, pointed you to the brushstrokes, knowing you'd eventually see the masterpiece. They tore free from my grasp with surprising strength, a flash of metal glinting in their hand. A small, wicked blade, not for a fight, but for a last, desperate act. They slashed wildly, aiming for my face, but my instincts, dulled but not entirely forgotten, kicked in. The engine's roar intensified, a final, guttural cry. The jet was ready to move. This wasn't just about catching them anymore. It was about stopping the very thing that had brought me here, the echoes of the past that threatened to consume the present. I had to stop them. Not for redemption, not for the headlines, but for the quiet, tormented faces of the victims, past and present. I charged, tackling them low, driving them into the damp tarmac. We grappled, a frantic dance of desperation and resolve. He taught me everything. They breathed, their breath hot against my cheek as they struggled. The precision, the art of the hidden message. You thought you knew his work, but you only saw the surface. The weight that doesn't add up moments I dismissed, the subtle variations in the patterns. They weren't imperfections, but an evolution. This wasn't a copycat, it was a successor, a student who had surpassed the master. The informant wasn't just mirroring the methods, they were perfecting them, finishing a legacy. Who was he to you? I demanded, pressing my advantage, pinning them tighter. The years of guilt of chasing ghosts converged into a singular, burning focus. Their eyes gleamed, wild with a victory I hadn't yet denied them. He was my father, Cole, the man you let slip through your fingers, the one you failed to understand. I merely continued his work, refined it, made sure his vision truly came to fruition. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. His son. Asterisk, the serial killer I'd hunted, the ghost that had haunted my waking hours and plagued my sleep, had left behind a legacy, a twisted inheritance. All those years, I'd assumed the killer was a solitary monster, an anomaly. My failure wasn't just in losing the father. It was in never even considering the possibility of the son. The self-doubt, a familiar, bitter taste, welled up. How could I have been so blind? So utterly consumed by one perspective that I missed the glaring, horrifying truth? Just then, the wail of distant sirens began to pierce the roaring engine's thunder. A small caravan of vehicles, their headlights still muted, approached the edge of the private airstrip. Reinforcements. My call had gone through. The orchestrator's eyes widened, the manic gleam replaced by a flicker of true panic. They strained, trying to break free, but I held on, my grip unyielding. The jet's engine, sensing its moment was passing, began to spool down, the pilot realizing the futility of escape. The roaring beast was slowly being tamed. The first vehicle, an unmarked sedan, skidded to a halt near us. A colleague, the one who'd begrudgingly listened to my frantic theory, emerged, a grim expression on their face, weapon drawn. Behind them, other officers, their uniforms stark against the dim backdrop, fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "Cole," the colleague shouted, their voice tight with adrenaline. "Are I all right?" I didn't answer, my gaze still fixed on the man beneath me. The orchestrator, the son of the killer, was defeated, their struggle fading into ragged breaths. The sudden quiet was deafening, broken only by the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant, fading wail of sirens. The air, thick with the smell of jet fuel and damp earth, felt suddenly lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, every joint aching. I watched as they led the orchestrator away, their head held high despite the cuffs, a defiant, unrepentant glint in their eyes. The game was over. The heists would stop. The colleague approached me, their face etched with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I got him, Cole," they said, their voice hushed. "I actually got him." I looked out at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, now quiet, the jet a silent sentinel under the emerging sliver of moonlight. The years of failure, of self-imposed exile, hadn't erased the guilt, but they had, perhaps, forged a new kind of resolve. I hadn't caught the father, but I had stopped the son. The cold wind whipped around me, but for once it felt less like a chill and more like a breath of fresh air.